Hey gang, welcome back to another video. So recently a friend and patron sent me a message asking if I had any ideas of what they could do with some leftover maple syrup jugs. So after I put my brain to it, I came up with a pretty good idea. So swashbuckle yourself in, and let's get to it. First things first, let's see what we can do with this maple syrup jug. The overall shape is 90% of the way there, but we'll definitely need to get rid of the cap, which I was able to cut off with a utility knife. The next thing I'll need to do is change the color. I grabbed some spray paint and gave it a quick pass of a dark brown, and then set it aside to dry. While I waited, I looked at a bunch of old flagon jugs and they all had a thick banding on them. So I grabbed some 1/4-inch EVA foam and cut it down to size. I also marked off where I was going to add in some lacing holes, but I'll talk more about that later. Before I could get to painting the foam, I wanted to add a bit of texture to it. So I grabbed my heat gun and a ball of aluminum foil and got to stamping. Heating the foam allows for the texture of the foil to leave an impression. However, if you heat the same area more than once, you'll lose that texture. In the end, I found it better to grab some heat-resistant gloves and heat the foil before stamping it into the foam. This step really isn't necessary. I just figured it was an opportunity to add a little detail to this section that might help during the aging process. Next up was paint. All of the reference images I found showed these jugs with a lighter color midsection, so I grabbed some acrylic paint and got to painting. I also found an old East India Trading Company logo and made myself a stencil on my vinyl cutter. Once the stencil had been applied, I could start filling it in with a bit of black acrylic paint and a brush. But that's where things went drastically wrong. Okay, it may have been because it was 115 degrees outside, or that I was in a rush, but I forgot that EVA foam needs a base coating in order for paint to adhere to it. So I flipped the foam over, reapplied the texture, painted it with Plasti-Dip and acrylic paint, and then reapplied a new stencil. This time, rather than painting with a brush, I grabbed the same dark brown spray paint to make sure that the stencil came out extra sharp, and after a few minutes I was able to remove the stencil. As a bit of insurance, I gave the piece a coating of matte Mod Podge Ultra and let it dry before jumping into the weathering. I went with burnt umber and raw sienna acrylics thinned with a bit of water and got to applying the weathering with a chip brush. Because it was so hot, the paints were setting up really quickly, so to extend my working time, I grabbed my trusty tiny spray bottle of water and got to pushing the paint around. I found that the wash was a bit too orange, so I added a bit of black to the mixture and kept working at it until it looked more like I'd imagined. And then it was off to dry in the sun. Once it was dry, it was time for the last detail. A bit of leather lacing. A bit of lacing off camera, and it was time to slip it onto the jug. Now this probably is not at all how these jugs looked in real life, but since the overall aesthetic was so plain, I thought this would be a nice little detail to further hide the fact that this previously carried syrup. The last thing I wanted to do was to make it look old and dusty. If you saw my potion bottles video, then this will look familiar. I'm using a satin clear coat spray paint as the adhesive and a bit of baby powder for the dust. This adds both a dusty look, but also a bit of texture since I like to apply it in multiple layers. As an added bonus, because I use the satin clear coat, it also gives the brown paint a bit of shine like old glass, and the powdered dust helps to give it a bit of depth. So this syrup bottle looks a bit more like a glass jug instead of a plastic one. Now I'd say that's not too bad, considering the alternative would be to throw it into a landfill. Well, that's going to do it for this one. Be sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already, but most importantly, go make something.